Do you want to ask, why don't you ask your question that you just asked me that I asked you to save? Extra question.
Are we okay to record you while you're performing?
Yeah, so like what we find these days, like everyone, you know, I remember when I'd first left college and we were like, oh gosh, someone's taking photographs of us, you know, but these days, like everyone documents everything. What I'd say musicians don't like is when you put up like 6 minutes, so like an entire track, like on, and to be fair, like most like younger people don't do that, but we know like some people in some venues, they're really bad at just putting up like half the gig or like, and we really don't like stuff like that. I mean, there's nothing we can do about it, but we find that quite irritating. But little clips and little Instagram stories, that's just a part of, you know, just being a musician, you know, these days. So absolutely you can, yeah. And for yourselves as well. If you're just keeping it for yourself, then it's the point, yeah. Cool, that was an extra question that I thought was worth having for the room. Yeah, cool. Does anyone else want to go? I know I can see more there, but yeah.
Would you say that having like an education in music and like going to music colleges and universities has helped you like become a musician?
Ooh, that's a difficult question to answer, purely because the easy answer is yes. So, for example, if I come across someone who has got, in my opinion, like loads of creative potential, but they're not necessarily on that conservatoire route, which is often like a really interesting thing. You know, like there's quite a lot of people these days who are sort of hot-housed, you know, and it's a growing, you know, I mean, I had a very musical family, none of them were professional musicians, so I had loads of support and encouragement, and I grew up in Shropshire. There's like quite a healthy kind of young people music scene there, like with orchestras and bands and stuff. But I learnt about jazz through like older musicians and in a very sort of kind of more apprenticeship kind of style way as I got into it. So I would say when I come across a young person who hasn't done that normal route, I'm really excited by that, because they have like loads of other things to say, and I know from my own experience teaching in conservatoires now that you're going to have loads to offer and different things to say, that it's like a really huge part of what a jazz, you know, jazz in the broadest sense allows us to do. So the reason I do that, the reason I recommend, you know, like if I come across someone who's really strong, that I encourage them to consider conservatoires, because they might not think that they're good enough, or they might think it's, you know, because that's how I felt when I was younger. And I know that it's through conservatoire, even though conservatoires have their issues, for sure. Like I teach in one and I know exactly, you know, what the issues are. Having said that, if you want to play, and you love music and you want to play and you want to meet people and you want to meet other people that love music as much as you do, they're a brilliant place to be. And if you go anywhere else, if you go to a university or anything like that, you won't have the space to practice and play and do all that stuff in the way that you can at conservatoire, and that's just what I know, that's my own experience. It doesn't mean you can't do an undergrad in something else and then get into music later though. Right? So there's loads of like fascinating musicians all over the place doing all sorts of things. So I would never say you have to have gone to conservatoire to be brilliant at music, because I just don't believe that at all. But if I come across a young person who shows loads of potential and that's really what they want to do and they haven't considered that route before, then I try to encourage them as much as I can, because I think it's a confidence thing. Does that kind of, do you understand what I mean? Yeah, so it's kind of yes and no kind of answer, but any other questions? Yeah?
What should music be, in your opinion?
What should... I don't have an answer to that at all.
What would, I suppose, the end goal be with a performance or a composition or something? What should it try and achieve?
I don't think in end goals, I think in like process. Yeah? So when I'm performing, like what's amazing about doing a tour where you're playing with people like nearly every night is that you get the whole memory of all the things that you've done before and how you're going to respond to those. So it's not just responding to the music on that day in that space, it's like all the memories of all the things that you've done before and all that kind of stuff. And I'm sort of always excited about what it's going to make me think about next, if that makes sense. So like I'll be really sad at the end of our tour, but I'm also quite excited about where my head's going to be at as a result of the tour. Does that kind of make sense? So I don't think of it like that at all. Like I think music's like people speaking to each other, it's expression, it's concentration, it's dedication, it's liberation, you know, it's all these, that's why it's such a brilliant space to sort of be in. And but I mean, it's hard to fight for it, but like when I'm in that, I think performing, I would say, is where I feel most like everything is coming together, if that makes sense. So when I write, just to answer your question about the composition thing, when I write, I love imagining other people playing the music. That's what makes me excited about it. Okay.
How do you cope with the business side?
That's a very good question. I have a really great team, particularly for this tour. I've got an amazing team of people that have been really supporting me, and it's probably the most supported I've felt probably since I left music college, because it just takes a very long time to get to a point, with this kind of music anyway, to sort of be kind of basically earning enough money to make it worthwhile being able to like pay other people to help you with things. It takes a long time to get there. And so I've sort of gradually I've kind of had more and more help as time has gone by with booking gigs and organising things. But as I say, like I've got an agent who is amazing, and I just started working with her in December of the first bit of COVID, whatever year that was, 2020, yeah? So was that like 18 months or something? And she's totally brilliant, but it has, you know, I'm 38, it's taken me this long to find like someone that I feel really confident with working with, and I can really trust her to kind of, you know, just be on it and brilliant and all that kind of stuff. And then when I have, you know, I brought out an album with this tour, so the label, it's a new label that I'm working with this time, and they're really brilliant, and they're really on it, which is really, really helpful, sort of with mainly what we'd call like PR and distribution. So like PR is like getting the message out to people about what you're doing, which is really, really important. Like if you put a lot of work into a project creatively, like you know, artists are not always the best people to be kind of sharing their stories with people or knowing how to do it, because you feel very kind of, oh, I don't know, you know, about it. So you really have to learn to get comfortable with, you know, we're not very good in this country at being like comfortable with being proud of what we were just talking about the other night, because we were listening to a podcast, someone who's American, and like I think when I meet American musicians, like they seem, just the culture of that country is like amazing for that, just being proud of what you believe in and saying it. And I think we could be better at that in this country, you know, for sure. Like so that's really important. That's like a big important part of the business side. If you have your own project anyway, you know, if you have your own and you're kind of communicating with people who aren't musicians, you know, that's, I think, a really valuable thing for artists to respect, is like how you communicate with people, you know, because it's just too easy to look awkward and a bit insular, you know. So I think that's a really important part of the business side. And is there anything else kind of, I guess just like not letting it take over. Yeah, so you kind of like when I did my first tour, I had to do all the booking myself, and like it is quite kind of, but just making sure you leave enough time for yourself so that when you're actually doing the tour and you're actually doing the gigs, you can just focus on the music. And if you get it wrong, you know, like if you know, I've had projects where they've just been too involved and just too much, and then I reevaluate. So I go, you know what, next time I'm not going to do it like this, or I'm going to do it like this, or I'm going to ask so-and-so to do this, or whatever. And you kind of learn as you go, so that you don't get, it has to be sustainable, you know, like the energy that you put in, that isn't, you know, the fun music bit.
Yeah, I was, wanted to ask, like, before you've got an agent and a team behind you, how do you go about like organising gigs and negotiating with labels, stuff like that?
I don't think I've ever negotiated with a label, because it's usually just sort of these days there isn't much to negotiate, but I know what you mean. I would say that it's very hit and miss, and that is the honest truth. Like, there is no set way to get anything in the music industry. It is very random, and all I can say is that if you work really hard and people trust you over time, that pays off. So that's like general advice. And then it's just really trying things, you know, it's just going like, oh, what happens if I send this label an email? Like, will they respond? A lot of the time they won't, to be honest. But what I've learned, when I reflect on things that I've done over time, you don't always know when someone's paying attention. So there might be something that you've done where you don't think anyone cares or whatever, but someone's noticed, and then later on down the line, does that kind of make sense? I wish I could give you a more helpful answer. Unfortunately, I can't, because I would be lying. But I think you need to kind of to feel fresh and you know, and to feel fulfilled and comfortable in what you're doing as a musician. I think you need a lot of grit. I really, really believe that. So that's something I look for in young people as well. Just as much, if not more so, than where they're at with their instruments. It's like, have they got grit? Have they got that spirit that I know is going to enable them to kind of like see their way through and be positive and make a difference to the scene of people? Does that kind of make sense? Something I think about a lot when, you know, there's loads of young people I come across who can do lots of very clever things, and you know, a couple of us will just be thinking like, are they going to survive when they leave music college? You know, because you can tell. So I think that's a really important thing to remember. And it's not about being an extrovert. That's the thing, right? Like, I often think it's like, you kind of have to be quite vulnerable and fragile to be super strong. I really, really think that too. Not just in your music, but in how you kind of survive in the industry as well. So it's not about, you know, going like, oh, that person's really confident. You know, it's not about that. So don't ever feel, if that's not you, don't ever feel just because you're not that big extrovert that you're not suited to this music, because I don't think that's true at all. Any other questions? I know you've got a couple more. You've got one as well.
How do you usually deal with like creative dropout and like blocks in practicing?
Ooh, that's a very good question. I'm very lucky, I think, in that I generally sort of have always seemed to, it doesn't mean it's going to last forever, but I generally kind of have an idea of what I'm interested in next. And I just follow those interests. I don't worry too much. Like, I don't really know more than about a year in advance what I'm going to be doing, and it's worked for me thus far. So I find it very hard to, like, if someone suggests something to me that is like good for me to do for my career, in their opinion, I find it quite hard to go along with that. Like, I really like wrestle with those sorts of things. So creatively, I don't know, like if I've got like a deadline, let's say I'm writing some music and I've got a deadline, it's about leaving space for it, and like experience tells you that if I leave space for it, I can make it happen. And composition is very much about making decisions. So I think it's really important, you know, when we talk about creativity, we can often think it's like, oh, it's like a lightning bolt, or that only happens to really special people, or that only happens to that. Creativity is sort of getting confident with taking an idea and developing that idea, right? So it's like lots of micro decisions. So if you can sort of sit with that and think, it sort of takes the pressure off, because it's not about like creating like some masterpiece or the best thing, or it's just about making something. Does that kind of make sense? So because I think of it like that, and I find teaching actually, like if I'm teaching composition, that sort of helps me as well, because it's reinforcing my own philosophy. Like when I'm saying it back to people, so it enables me to, because I can be positive about other people's music. Do you know what I mean? Like you can, yeah. So it's kind of like learning how to take the pressure off yourself is like the key to staying creative in a way. Does that answer? Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And then the practicing thing is just discipline. Yeah, pure and simple. You know, it's like a very wise person said to me once, like music, or you know, whatever we want to call it, making things. It's like half of it is like the amazing, awesome bit. And the other half is like the doing your work, yeah, doing your practice, doing whatever it is that needs to be done to make it happen. And that's the tricky thing about instrumental music, is like you've got to get those hours in, otherwise you can't play your instrument well enough. That's why it's hard, you know. Yeah.
I was just going to ask, how did you actually first get into performing and recording?
Recording, that came later. So performing, I think the first, to be honest, at home, like with my granddad. My granddad taught himself piano and I used to sing with him. And then later I played piano and sang. So like performing started in my home, I would say. You know, my dad would have like friends around, you know, people that were in his choir or whatever, and we just sang and stuff. So that's where it started. Recording, it's probably a lot sooner for younger people these days, I would say. Like for me, I guess, maybe just before music college, maybe. Properly at music college, I would say. And then you just, yeah, it's just experience, getting better at it.
That question is linked to the how did you get to where you are professionally?
Oh, I don't know. Just, as I said before, like I've literally only ever known what I'm doing like about a year in advance, unless you have like, there are occasionally when it's like quite a big opportunity thing that they come in and you're maybe like 2 years away or something. But I don't know, just all the things that I've already said really, like tenacity, blind faith is for real blind faith. Like you just sort of have to kind of be really good at being in the present and trusting yourself, which is really hard. It's like knowing yourself and trusting yourself, like really, really hard, but that's kind of the answer, really, I would say. Yeah.
How do you try and keep interest, especially in like a jazz standard that's been done 1,000 times by just about everybody?
I think it's just curiosity. I think it's just keeping curious about everything and trying to always, you know, it gets easier as you get older, that's the good news. Like seeing things like that and not like that. You know, like tunnel vision is for like very specific instrument practice. For like creative decisions, it's kind of like being able to take that bigger view, and if you're playing with like really inspiring people, it doesn't matter what you're playing on, do you know? Yeah.
Which is, where do you find other musicians to create a performance? Where did you find that?
Oh, so most of them, not Mike. Mike I met probably later on, but James and Ross sort of around music college time, which is why I was saying to you about that answer about music college being such a great, it's not the only way to meet people, but it's a great place to meet people. And then it's just on the scene, you kind of, I don't know, you kind of collect people as a musician, you know, like people that you really resonate with. And it's different for everyone. We all do very different things. So we've all got different approaches to being a musician. But I think really it's just, you know, over time, just working out who's right for you and who isn't right for you. And it's kind of a slightly different answer as a band leader saying that, because I'm obviously looking for that really special click. And I think with, you know, with my lineup, I mean, it's probably been since 2014. It's quite hard to keep the same, you know, to keep doing the same thing with the same people, because it's just so hard to do that in this country, or just at the moment anyway. So it's really, really tough. But I think you just sort of have to, I think people find you. I think it comes over time is the answer. It's not necessarily who you went to music college with, I don't think. And they were, you know, we were in slightly different ages anyway, so yeah.
Well, I'd probably say that potentially the biggest problem facing jazz artists would be living up to the expectation of all the artists that have gone before them, trying to do something new and interesting.
I think one of the biggest challenges for jazz artists at the moment is the practice, having to sort of work through problems you might encounter and just stick at it. It takes a long time?
I think a challenge for professional jazz artists would be finding younger listeners and inspiring them, because quoting a movie here, I feel like personally as well that jazz is almost dying, so finding younger listeners would be a massive challenge. One pearl of wisdom that I would take away is, as somebody who's going away to do music further on, I would definitely get to know people on my course, interact with them as she did with her course in music. So that would be something I would take away.
Well, I think probably the pearl of wisdom I'd have to take away would be being individual and trying to be unique in the sound I create.
You don't have to follow the crowd on the music. You can let it sounds just as good if you let it flow. You don't have to have a solid, rigid structure.
I think a pearl of wisdom to take away from the whole experience is that while creating something new can be important, it doesn't mean that you have to deviate away from anything previously established.
I think just sort of like visually communicating to each other would be a good skill to bring back, because you see them looking at each other and confirming when they're doing the solos.
I think some knowledge that I would bring into the Red Hot Band would be similar to my last answer in I would like to further get to know my bandmates and, I don't know, just interact with them a bit more. I think that'd be quite interesting.
A decently useful skill to bring to the Red Hot Band would be more communication sort of within performance between band members.
Probably the most memorable part of the experience would be the chat with the band at the start and the information they were able to pass on, and how I can use that myself in my own music.
I think the bit I'll remember the most is watching the sound check beforehand. It's something you don't usually get to see at a concert. It's a good thing to witness.
I think the part I'm going to remember the most is the Q&A, simply because it was so interesting listening from another musician's point of view who also went through college, and yeah, I think that's really interesting.
I think I'll remember the sit-down chat that we had with the band at the very start, being able to sort of see their method and understand what they do before a gig.